Hello, hello. Just gonna get set up here real quick. Oh boy. Yo, this week went by so quickly. To the point where it's like, is it Friday? It's gotta be Friday because like on my schedule it says I'm supposed to go live on Friday. I'm like, okay. But how is it Friday already? I don't get it. I don't get it. So, all right. So I got Facebook. Cool. We're all set here. Oh boy. Friday is a little bit of, typically this day is a day that I took for myself when I first started entrepreneurship and self-employment, I guess is what you call it. And what that looked like for me was going full-time into private practice, which I had my own, LLC, but I was attached and still am attached to that small private practice. So shout out to Milestones, Mental Health and Wellness. All the clinicians there, we're all contractors. So we kind of all had, we're coming from these places of where we were attached to a caseload. And there's Maisie. Hopefully she's going to be quiet. Probably not. Maisie, come here. Come on. Come on. Can't be holding up too long. Throw myself off. But Fridays have kind of turned into they're like, I don't see clients on Fridays because it was more my admin day, and it's still a little bit of that, but I really actually look forward to Fridays, not because I get like a day off, because a lot of people were like, oh, you get 3-day weekends. And I'm like, when you work for yourself, you have to be able to disperse the load. You have to look for balance within how you plan, when you get work done and when things happen. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about balance and in the intersection between codependency, because codependency is my specialty from a clinical level. Excuse me while I'm going to get my cat mom duties settled. But I also like to be able to put it into like real world application, because codependency is not a one size fits all cookie cutter, like, oh, that's codependency. It literally is something that's very covert. It does not, it's like a shapeshifter in a lot of ways. Like, it can look one way and then it can look another way, and it's literally all around us. And it's not a negative thing. It's not a bad topic. It actually is something that we need in our lives, and it allows intimacy within our relationship. It allows that give and take and that flow within the relationships that we have, which is why it's so, I think, difficult for, well, one, it's been stigmatized. It's like, oh, if you're codependent, you got problems, you got issues. I'm here to tell you that you're not, but I'm a little biased because I am a very codependent person, and I'm in recovery from a lot of codependency traits. And it's something that you just learn to live with, and you learn to keep an eye out, and you learn how to balance it. So I'm not like a fitness influencer. I'm not trying to go be a personal trainer. I'm not trying to do a lot of what typical influencer stuff. I'm really trying to educate people on how to influence their own life, and to bring that control and stability and balance to the natural life and the personality and the relationships that you have in your world. So I feel like Instagram, I don't know. Anyways, I'll leave it. It is what it is. I'm live, so y'all can see it. But that is a very broad topic. So I'm going to kind of center it around something, and I really just want to put this out there to prompt people. As part of my routine, I expose myself to intellectual like conversations to try to, learn, that's one thing. But also because I don't watch the news, and I can't really watch the news, especially after a long day of clients, because it's a lot of reality, and I stay in people's realities all day as a therapist, mental health and addictions. So at one point in my life, I blocked myself away from a lot of the news. And what I realized is that that was an imbalance. It was a survival and defense mechanism for me because I was so overstimulated by an imbalance in a lot of different areas of codependency in my life that it was continuously stressful and triggering for me because I just couldn't turn off. Like my brain couldn't relax. And still to this day, I'll be honest with you, at the moment, I have a TV. I own a TV. It's just in my storage unit, and I don't have a TV here. I stay on a screen all day. So I've had to shift in turn to find balance within how I just stay exposed to screens. And still, I don't get exposed to as much news and stuff going on unless it's on social media, which you have to be very cautious about. So I don't know if y'all are hearing me with this. I mean, you may be stressing out from just how I'm talking about it, but its imbalances are everywhere around us. And it comes down to codependency. So what is codependency, right? The way that I explain it to people is that it is a dependency or an attachment or a imbalance, like relied upon. That sounded weird. Something that you rely upon outside of yourself for worthiness, for self-esteem, for existence. You see this most commonly, just gonna be honest, in your toxic. Anything that we've labeled toxic it usually comes down to an imbalance in codependent traits. From anything toxic usually is going to be from an interpersonal realm. So it's each person's individual imbalances that are coming into the space of another person's imbalances. We all have them. What your job, especially in transformation, is to know and to take inventory of those imbalances so you know how they're going to mix with other people's imbalances. And when I say, I feel like imbalances, I'm using that word because it is representative of a lot. It can be an internal imbalance from like chemical standpoint. So you literally could have medical issues going on within your own person, or I'm going to zoom out a little bit more, the imbalance in your generational path. And this is where today, part of what I had to do to adapt and listen, be able to stay connected to the outside world, because my clients are connected to the outside world. So not only do I need to know what's kind of going on, but I also need to understand the dynamics of what's happening, because that influences people. And then they come to me and I'm like, how do I help you cope? And then also realistically send you back out into the world and not know what you're going through, right? So I listened to, one of the things that I listen to is The Journal, which is a podcast on Spotify. So I will link the episode that I'm referring to, but I was just listening to it as I was, I don't know if y'all know, but my hair looks, I just blow dried my hair. It was wash day. Not gonna lie, it was wash day. I need a haircut right now, but as I'm getting ready, I'm listening to this episode, and it is about the drug Humira. I don't know if anyone is familiar with it, but it is a drug for rheumatoid arthritis, a lot of different autoimmune disorders. Something that I've been pretty familiar with as a social worker. We have to have kind of knowledge on a little bit of everything. That's why I got too much information in my head not to share it with y'all. So, but I'm not I wouldn't say I'm an expert on Humira, but what I'm an expert on is what Humira ultimately, how it presents in people's lives when there's an underlying stress and trauma disorder that causes secondary disorders that Humira treats. Did y'all catch that? Because I can probably not repeat that very well, but I specialize in the underlying issues that cause the stress. That stress triggers the autoimmune disease, and then Humira helps to treat the autoimmune consequences. So whenever your body starts to attack itself, it will cause plaque psoriasis, arthritis. So ultimately your immune system starts to attack your body because it thinks that there's a threat, but a lot of the times the threat, I mean, it is a real threat, but it's usually either our stress or there's a bacterial imbalance or a what's that word? Chemical imbalance, but there is just something internally that is causing the disruption. So therefore your body's reacting to it, right? So this episode shined a light on kind of what I want to really talk about. And this is kind of, I don't want to say it's a trend, because if this becomes a trend, then we're going to be, I would have missed that one, but healing, generational traumas. There's a big wave of new generations, mostly within the Gen X, millennials and Gen Zers, who are realizing the impact of what long-term generational codependent imbalances within their family structures have caused. And it's leading and causing a lot of not only just health issues, but mental health issues and emotional health issues. And so that's where I come in, right? Like I have a lot of knowledge on the physical side of things because I've had my own physical health journey in trying to address a lot of those long-term traumas from my own family structure, but not my physical makeup is not the same as everyone else's. So that's where it's like, I will always encourage someone to do something. If they have to do it alone to start with, that's okay, but it would be better if you had some consultation along the way from trusted providers, one like myself, for the emotional and the mental health part and a little bit of the physical. But then I also know people to get you to, the information that you need to know about the physical makeup of your body, and have those resources, because healing is a very isolating experience. You will have to do some versions on your own. You can't you can't do everything with everyone, because then we'd be back to the concept of codependency. It's like you would be back in people pleasing of like trying to make sure that you stay attuned to everyone else and leaving yourself as the last one. That's literally the opposite of what it's going to take for you to take control of your life and align with transformation. So where was I going with that? This episode really brought to light probably one of the main reasons that I chose to start on my health journey. And I had a lot of whys. I'm not gonna lie, I could list a lot of them, but the ones that are pertinent to this particular discussion comes down to generational impact. And so my family, I have a lot of military background in, and the importance of history. This is where it's like, you're supposed to be talking about mental health. I'm not a history expert. I actually have family members who I probably need to have them on to talk about history. They're history teachers, all that. But when I realized, one of the things my mom has always said when she watches the news, which I love her, but I don't think people need to watch the news that much. I don't. But when she watches the news, she's always told me, she's like, it's history in the making. And I was like, you know what? That part makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. It is literally, as the clock ticks, whether you're in the moment or not, history is right now. And history, I'd say more history is evolving right now. History obviously stems back to what has happened. But if we do not find balance between reflecting on what's happened and taking into account of what's happening right now and truly value the experience of right now, that's where the cliche of history repeats itself will happen. And it's a cliche for a reason, y'all. I'm the queen of cliche. I'm the queen of stereotypes. I love to talk about them because they exist for a reason, because they happen. History is repeating itself because there is a general population of, and I'm speaking this from, as a macro. I don't know who you are specifically, but if you resonate with this, it starts on the individual level that if you refuse your history, if you refuse your family dynamics and don't understand where you come from, or there's some circumstances where people don't have access to that history. So if you don't have insight on your history, biological makeup, common diseases, traumas, mental health histories, and honestly, even occupational, like people's occupation, because I psychoanalyze a whole lot, which means to understand someone, that people's occupation dictates a lot of their personality and who they are and what they pass on in their family structures. So when we look at codependency, I'm taking a look at all aspects of how does that individual come to be who they are, imbalanced or not, because the only way that you're going to get balanced is if you're imbalanced. They cannot exist without each other, which is why codependency, I get so passionate about it, because I'm like, yo, literally, these things that we deal with in everyday life sit on the seesaw, the teeter of codependency. We have to be one way and we have to be an opposite way. We all got a little two-faced in us. It's called being emotional and being rational. Like, one of my favorite things that actually motivated me in my story, just a little brief moment here, is you cannot know happy unless you've been depressed. And if you deny yourself that existence of acknowledging that you may be depressed or you may not be happy, then you're not going to be able to dislodge yourself from where you are now to do something different, to change the course of history in your own story, in your family story, and ultimately the next generation. So going back to this podcast episode, right? Just a little tune into what I'm working a lot right now on, I've kind of paused new clients for the moment because I need to really get solid on my messaging. Like, I can teach so much, but I also need to make sure it makes sense for people. And I have to make sure that it's consolidated and it's not as overwhelming and span it out over time. So I was realizing that, my primary focus of clientele, I've already figured out, providers. But my thing is I'm trying to figure out, where do I get these providers at what point in their story, right? Everyone's going to be at a different point. But what dawned on me listening to this podcast episode, which it's dawned on me before, but it just was like, okay, well, I'm going live, so let me talk about it, is that we're coming from a generation of severe imbalance and dependency, straight up dependency on an old version of the healthcare system that needs to be changed. Now, it needs to be reformed as slowly as possible, because there's a large group of people that are dependent on that. And so when you are dependent on something, you take that away from someone, you don't leave them with a reality or an existence that they know how to cope with. So you can't just be like, stop, shut it down. You have to gradually make these changes and phase in and phase out of these things that you make changes for, because people are relying and dependent upon them. So, but what I realize is that you've got a lot of people who, and usually the younger generation, that do not have models. Yes, models. You, me, other people who will model what a balanced existence, a healthy, codependent existence lifestyle is, because they are completely coming from dependent families. I know this. You may know this. You guys may talk about this within your small groups, which is great, because if you do, I would love to hear it. I'd love to have conversations with people. But it's hard to acknowledge that and then also know what to do with it. And what I've noticed as a clinician was seeing a very, very small population of people that is somewhat diverse, but not, but my career spans out in different environments. So I have some diversity there. And the common denominator really comes down, this maybe, I will expand upon this a little bit more, but it came down to timing for me. I was at a point in my life where it was just as hard to me to realize that I have these unhealthy codependent imbalances within myself because of what I have been exposed to. What I was like, there's nothing wrong with my parenting. It's just like generationally, they did not have the information that they have now to justify the way parenting was going to go and not have significant impacts on mental health. That's why we have this whole crisis. It's a big wave. It's just kind of, it's rearing up and dying down at the same time too. I'm hopeful for the future because I see other people who've realized it before me and who have their own experience, and they're teaching and they're coaching and they're consulting with younger generations to help them realize these things early. But for me, as social and out there as I was before, because I'm fairly naturally introverted, if y'all don't really know that, I've changed a lot. And I forced myself to change that because it fed into my codependent background. But we need to start being the change that we want to see in the world. The problem is that we're stuck, because if we come from a codependent background or an imbalance, then that creates an internal imbalance that breeds inconsistencies. Not just one inconsistency, it's inconsistencies, because burnout is likely going to be prevalent. You're going to have an extremely high level of tolerance to your stress, but you're also going to be unaware of that tolerance, what makes it a little bit different than being aware of a high stress tolerance. Now, I'm not going to say that is that much better, but I will say awareness is a little bit safer than an unaware person, or an unaware amount of tolerance to something. You can see that in just drug and alcohol use, as an example. Stress is one of the hardest ones. Now, we've known about stress and the impacts of stress. Why do we keep ignoring it? Because literally our bodies are trained at that point by stress to be like, you can't do anything about it. You can't, what you want? Like, it's not a conversation like that sophisticated in your head. It literally is just your switch. Like, it's your stress response. It's like, and we're done, lights out. And you don't really have a chance to make any kind of like, I want to say any progress, but by the time, what I commonly see with other people, and also what I go through with myself, and I literally just had to learning, I'll just put myself, I'm learning this lesson yet again, is by the time that you actually realize that you've made progress, life comes back, hits you with a new problem, knocks you down, and you get frustrated, and then the emotional response triggers a whole lot of more powerful old behaviors than you've solidified in new behaviors. It's exhausting. I literally, thinking about it, and maybe it's just because I was talking and not really breathing a whole lot, but just thinking about, and I'll speak on my clients, what my clients have to go through. And I watch them because I'm the person that they come back to, and that some of them have become dependent on, which is partly why I'm doing something new, because I want to start teaching people how to not be dependent on something. Or on the other end of the spectrum, because this is where codependency gets its other hat, is the toxicity of independence. Yes, independence. It's not a bad thing to be independent, but as a existence, you become, or I'll use myself as an example for this one. I became so highly independent that I created my own commitment issues in relationships. I never fully trusted people, so therefore I could never fully trust myself, which limited my ability to communicate my needs, my values, my expectations in relationships. And it restricted me from actually finding love. And let's just be honest, everyone wants to be loved, even a narcissist. It's backwards, but literally they were only looking for love at one point in time before they started taking it from other people. So we get into this imbalance. It's so tricky, y'all. When I tell y'all, it is not something that you should do alone. I really stand behind that. And my clients know how I feel about the word should. Should equals shame. And that's, I'm going to stay focused here because I'm doing really well. But shame is at the crux of codependency because we have convinced ourselves and we were given shame. Shame is a very effective tool. Very. It came from your parents too. It's like, you knew you should do better. You should do better. Oh, it just feels like it activates the central nervous system and attaches itself to the moments and the existences that we have and solidifies them. We leave a little piece of our soul, if I'm going to be a little bit more metaphorical and visual in that. A little piece of us is left, a breadcrumb of existence is left on those moments where we're shamed, where we're embarrassed. That's why you can recall them so much. Then you get enough of those moments of shame up together and they start hanging out together. And there's a trend in social situations or people, types of transfer, like clinical term here, but transference is just those associations that you have for people who remind you of other people. And it's all solidified in your body and you literally can't stop it. So I think after I beat that horse, it's tricky. What do you do about it, Sarah? Well, I'm trying, actually no. What I've done is trained myself to see things a certain way. So trying to be unbiased and having a support system that can give you that perspective is really one of the better ways to release yourself from those attachments to shame, to those existences. And another thing, and then the rest of them are just there's a lot of things that you have to do, but the reason that I'm also trying to put myself out there as a resource for people is that I have tried and tested, and that's been the last 5 years of my life, is really, when I say practice what I preach, because I saw this in myself from other people. Like I was working with drug addicts, with actually, let me rephrase that because I don't like to label I don't label anyone an addict. That's a personal identity that you have to choose. I identify as a recovering food and codependent addict because codependency is usually hand in hand with addiction, because we're constantly trying to address our own interdependence and our needs. So therefore it becomes imbalance, and then we start to look for things outside of ourselves. For me, it was food, because internally I had a lot of chaos emotionally from being in a divorced family. Like I said, generational trauma with the military and the stress, alcoholism, and just, all the way around, right? Where was I going with that? Food became a dependency for me. It's also considered, and one of the most underestimated, in my book, it's the most underestimated addiction that we have, because we call a process addiction in my field, because it's a process that naturally has to happen in our life. It literally helps us thrive. We have to eat. We have to eat food to live and to survive. And then ultimately what we eat helps us thrive. So a process, I'll go into that. This is more of open conversation, something to consider and reflect upon after 30 minutes. So I'm going to try to round it out here, but I really want y'all to take into consideration taking an inventory. It's really hard to look in the mirror, especially when you know you don't like yourself. We receive mirrors all the time from other people in form of critique and feedback and their point of views, their opinions. Those things trigger us because they're usually telling us something that we haven't been willing to look at before. And if you're able, by yourself, but please use caution because you know yourself better than anyone here as to how you're going to be able to cope with some of those emotions that come up. Remember, it's not going to all be coped with right then and there. You kind of have to span it out. But please consider going to therapy if you need to reflect on this. Is that what are the things that are causing you to be irritable, that are causing you to react, that are causing you to be immature, to feel guilty, to feel shameful, because those ultimately come from the imbalances of that codependent dynamic. That inventory. So if you go to my website, and I think it's in my link in my bio on my Instagram and stuff like that, I have a codependency inventory that I have put together for y'all to just start as a way of taking a look at, if you had to start making a small change, where could you start? Because there's a lot of places, and try not to get too overwhelmed, because remember, it's all connected. So therefore, you're eventually going to have to work on one of those things, whether you like it or not, because life is not going to let you get away from it. Life is going to keep bringing it back, and it's going to keep putting it in front of your face, and you're going to be like, sure, nope, I'm going to avoid it. Or you'd be like, okay, I can't avoid this for any much longer. Because avoidance is just a coping skill. We are on overwhelm. We probably had some other experience that got to us, and avoidance is natural. But if we judge it and we shame it, because that's usually the first thing that we're really good at, we got right on call, it causes that automatic response to go to avoidance. And that's where those codependencies become imbalanced, because we haven't been able to, and this is why I don't, there are so many choices that you have to make in life, but as a mental health clinician, I will hold you accountable to those choices, but I also realize those choices are not easy to just make like that. There are so many other things, very micro, like if this were a conversation about racism, microaggressions, and so that's probably not the best example, be honest with you. It's just the first thing that came to my mind, though. It's like internal microaggressions for your own self, though, and for your own experiences of oppression and of emotional oppression, some literally done on your own all the time. Still, they will continue. The therapy is about you being aware of them and you knowing how to navigate them and figure out how you want them to start working for you, because life is not about things working against you. A lot of it is law of attraction and working for you. You attract it and it just flows, but that does require work. It requires maintenance, because if you stop doing and manifesting and you stop doing what it takes to manifest what you want in your life, it's going to stop. You can't stop. You literally can't stop. Which is why, if I'm kind of bringing this back full circle, codependency runs rampant in anyone's family structure. I'd say there's more, I'm not going to give my opinion right now, but there's a lot of different presentations of it. And what I really try to teach people is the baseline, the foundation concept. So therefore you can take it back to your system. You can evaluate what it is that works for the system that you're in. And then therapy, traditional therapy, you learn all of that behind closed doors. This is where I'm going to kind of start explaining a little bit more about what my new role for myself is. But what I noticed is that people were becoming so dependent on therapy because they had never really actually had an interdependence. And just to be honest with you, it's a stereotype, but a lot of providers are unhealthy because they go into that profession, and I was one of them. I was the unhealthiest, healthiest person ever. It's a contradiction, but that is literally life. I had my own unaddressed traumas. I had my own unhealed wounds, for the lack of better terms. And I could help people. Absolutely. We're able to care for people and heal people and help people. But we also influence them in an, I wouldn't say completely negative, but we limit their influences because we're limited in our ability to be aware. We're limited in our ability to actually do and therefore move energy through our body, our own emotions, because we're usually bogged down by other people's, because we harbor that. And if we don't have those self-care practices and the training is a big one, because this is where a lot of in this new day and age where coaches are going to find you, if you hire a coach to help you with something like healing and trauma, healing trauma, you really want to consider what is their training. Not just, I mean, I think there are plenty of people who don't go to a university and have 4-year degrees and doctorate degrees that can help people heal trauma, but they need to have training and experience in doing so before you hire them, or else you're going to be really compromising your own healing and your own safety. And unfortunately, it needs to be their priority. I'm getting on a tangent and a soapbox right now, but I'm very passionate about that because I was one of those people. I'll admit it vulnerably. I'd never hurt anyone intentionally. I would never do that. But I wasn't actually taking care of myself. So they're intentionally. So therefore, I don't really know whether or not I was hurting anyone intentionally or not, because I was being unintentional. And there's going to be a degree of that exists throughout life, because we don't know the future, but we do know the past. And when we look at history, right? When we look at the history of codependencies, not only just in our own systems, but in the grander systems at play, whether that be the government, not going to touch that one today, but just the healthcare system. We have been taking care of and we've been healing people without giving them the insight to be able to heal themselves. And there's a lot of different topics and contexts that can go into that. Everyone, has their own way of healing, and I respect them, but it also has to start with the internal journey of knowing who you are and your personal identity to see how you're going to make a choice about what type of healing and what route of healing that you want to go in. So so therapy became this thing where a lot of people are like, oh, I'm so glad therapy works, cool. Anytime that I really tried to encourage them or push them to take the next step, I got this resistance. And I started noticing and then I started hearing certain things that I was like, therapy is not supposed to be for the rest of your life. If you break your leg and you go to physical therapy, do you want to be in physical therapy for the rest of your life? No, you don't want issues with your leg after a certain period of time. You want it to heal. This is the same thing, but therapy, it's a newer concept to a lot of people. It's not a new concept in general, but it's become where a lot of people and therapists also will accommodate keeping people in therapy for the rest of their life, because they have subscribed to the identity of being dependent on that healthcare system, of having a diagnosis, of having a medication, of having all of these, which those are really, they exist for a reason, because they're used to have tools for you to be able to figure out how you want to live your life and think it's possible. That's the biggest issue I have, is that it has convinced people that interdependence is not possible. No. No. I get that little gesture from I took a trip to Egypt, and the culture there is just it's so different. And this man who was helping us along our trip, we were just standing there, unbeknownst to us, just on the side of this really busy street in Cairo. And apparently it's not a great part of town. And as two women in a predominantly Muslim country, standing on the side of the road is just not a good thing. It's just not. And he was like, no. And he was like, come here. So no, we cannot believe any longer that healing is impossible. I don't care if you can't walk. I don't care if you can't do, there are going to be some challenges to the prognosis of wherever it is that you are, but it is not, let me reframe this because I'm leading with a negative here. It is completely reasonable and possible to heal from your imbalances. And if you don't have hope in it, well, I guess that's why I exist, because I have seen, I mean, in a lot of ways I want to call them miracles, but I guess I leave that door open to be, it's like, it could be even more. But I have seen so many people change their prognosis of their life. They've had infections, been on deathbeds, near-death experiences. It's just, that's an interest of mine, but like, from the binds of heroin addiction, the binds of like domestic violence relationships, because that's a degree of codependency. I have seen people become successes from something that they never believed. And I have some people right now who are still struggling with that. But I've also seen them at a time where they literally had no regard for their own life, so therefore the regard for other people's lives. They're a completely different person just by slowly acknowledging that it is possible to change. Codependency. It's expansive. So please let me know in the comments and your feedback, how can I help you make sense of codependency in your own life? Where I'm not sure I finished the sentence when I was talking earlier, but my new role, right, as I'm coming from being more of a traditional therapist, sitting in a chair, there's a couch in my office, we talk about your mommy issues, yep, and your daddy issues, and your sister issues, and all the issues. We talk about it. And then I help you figure out what to do about it. And once I realized, because my own life is like, okay, you can talk about it all day, but talking is doing something. But in order to gain momentum, you do have to have it paired with more action. I realized that my true purpose is the action part of it, giving people a platform of being able to do something different. So that's looked like I work pretty well with people with a lot of borderline personality disorder, because that's an extremely overstimulating diagnosis and identity that comes from a lot of complex trauma from generations, but then also in their own life. That's the tricky. Anyways, social anxiety is probably one of my favorite diagnoses to deal with, because it was one that hit a lot home for me. Being more naturally introverted, I was very shy growing up. I was very insecure, and I still have my bouts with insecurities. And like, this whole transformation for me is still pretty new, and it's still fresh, and I'm still learning how to figure out what it is that I want for my life. But I've also gotten the basics down, and I've built a foundation, and I've had failures specifically to tell people who are starting, who are in this first, I don't know, quadrant. I usually put things in threes. So it's like the first part of our lives is first in the newer generation. So it's like, if we can get people earlier on, we can prevent the longer term outcomes that are creating more chaos for our society, that will literally drive us apart, as create civil wars and allow history to repeat itself to the same extent that it has been, because we've been letting this shit go on for way too long. We really have. And that's where, I, for a long time, had to find my own confidence in saying these things and having opinions, because I was part of the system. I was part of, my formal education as a therapist. You're supposed to be unbiased. You're not supposed to have an opinion. Sorry, I stopped listening. I literally stopped listening to those old narratives for some time being, because I still listen to them for perspective of like ethics, of morals, and like the rigidity of like the older system that we do need, because like I said earlier, people are still dependent on that, and we're not going to be able to just take someone's existence away from them without causing a disruption. Like, that's taking away like a toy from a child, or a chocolate bar from a old version of Sara. I'm going to pitch a fit. Hey, and I really think that we're at this point in time where, you know what, I'm calling providers to the forefront here, because we are the ones that are usually leading with the example. People are watching us. And if we're not watching us, if we're not making sure that we're putting out in the world what it is that we intended to put out, then we're being sloppy. It's not best practice. It's not promoting a standard of care. And this is speaking more towards like healthcare clinicians right now, I'm not gonna lie. But we're in a position to influence because the general population is is dependent on us, and they are not really they're needing more from us. So that's why my call to action is calling people, call yourself out to what degree of denial are you resisting to acknowledge that, yo, this is not the life that you want to live. What we're talking about right now is codependency and the imbalances that come from it. And I really want my providers, who are the general population providers, so these are, and when I say general population, I mean like anyone that's not healthcare providers, because that's usually, I supervise a lot of healthcare providers or newer healthcare providers, and I'll be teaching this to the newer providers coming in because that's my role. But when I also speak to, when I say providers, I also mean like anyone who's a parent, fur babies included, because, well, they're not here right now, but your codependency shows up with your pets. Train your animals, train yourself, like it's literally, yeah. Anyways, provider, parents, teachers, anyone provides a service. We are all providers. It's kind of like I couldn't really just choose one little client niche. So I was like, yeah, providers. Because I mean, that's what I do, is I talk to people about the human experience, not the man's experience, not the woman's experience, the human experience. What you're literally given in this vessel and how to make it work for you. So, but my expertise is that codependency is the behavior pattern of addiction and what leads into addiction. I've just kind of moved it back to the underlying issues of emotional regulation and learning those skills to help you take yourself to if you don't want it to be another level, great. Expand into relationships, discover shit, go adventure, like make more money, whatever it is that you want to do, you can do it. But if you don't know the inner workings of your own vessel, you're not going to get very far. Realistically, not pessimistically. You're just not going to be able to get very far. Yeah. So, that is where I'm going to kind of put a pin in it. This is, so for anyone on Instagram, this full recording is on YouTube. So make sure you guys go follow. I'm starting and putting stuff out there on YouTube. I'm having also, my blog has started up. So if you go to my website, which I believe it comes is sarawilderlcsw.com, you can sign up for my blog to stay in tune. So I'll be sharing I've got some podcast episodes coming. I've got a surprise that I've told a couple people, but I'm not going to tell the whole general public, but when I start launching the things that I have been working on during a time of like been imbalanced, been doing a lot of work, but to get to my point where I can maintain and actually end up doing more in my life. But make sure you sign up for the blog. I'm going to be doing, some more live, not necessarily on Facebook. I'm actually going to be using a different platform called Fireside. So I'll be doing some very vulnerable talks about my own journey. This one I'm speaking kind of generally about topics and education and things to think about. But because the thing about as a therapy and living, right, is not about me telling you what you need to think like. I'm not going to tell you advice. I can't tell you how to live your life, but I will give you the information that you need to really get in that system and be like, all right, let me make sure I want this outcome. Let me make sure I want this, right? That's what I do. I will have some opinions about what's best practice, but I really try to limit those because everyone needs to make their own decisions in life. That's the secret to it all. You've been feeling shitty because you didn't make a decision truly about your needs. And every time you get sick, every time you get down, it's a matter of paying attention to what it is that you need. And then in turn, you get better. So, yeah, make sure you stay tuned for a lot more to come. But thank you for tuning in. Let me know if y'all made it through the whole thing. And I look forward to giving y'all more insights. And I'll make sure I post the link of the podcast so y'all can listen to that as well. It's only about 15 minutes. And yes, I get 50 minutes of a rant from just 15 minutes of content. Yeah, I talk a lot. So y'all have a good Friday. Enjoy your weekends. If it's not a weekend for you, because for me, I'm actually doing a little work. So, but make sure you find balance in the day of like 2 hours of work to an hour of fun. It doesn't have to be that ratio. It can be more fun than that, but make sure you take care of yourselves. Peace.